Hey, this is James, and in this video I'm going to be sharing another way that I work with Kipper cards. So stay tuned. Thanks so much for tuning in and joining me for this viewer requested video. Recently, one of my viewers asked me if I would be willing to share how I personally work with Kipper cards. And in a recent video, I shared what's called the line of sight reading because the request was also to share some basic spreads that the viewer could put into practice. And so I'm going to be building on that line of sight reading in this video with the reading that I'm going to be sharing here in this space. So if you haven't checked that out and you'd like to, I will be leaving a link to the line of sight reading video in the description box below. The deck that's going to be assisting me for this video is one of my favorites. This is Kipper by Paris de Bono. And I will be, as I always do, leaving links to information about the deck in the description box below. So now that I've set things up, let's get to the table and take a closer look at the cross spread. And here we are with the cards on the table, and before we get into how to lay the cards out, the first thing you're going to do is that you're going to need to take either the main person male out or the main person female out. We are literally building on what I talked about in the previous video, the line of sight. And in that video, I talked about using the main people cards, right? So depending on your gender, you would use the main person male if you're male, main person female if you're female, or the gender that you identify with, right? And if you're doing the reading for someone else or about someone else, depending on their gender, you would either use the main person male, main person female, or however they choose to identify in terms of gender, right? But you need to leave one or the other out because that's important. So what I'm going to do for this example, I'm going to use main person male like I did in the line of sight reading first, and I'll use myself as an example. So we're going to take main person female and put her back into the deck. So what we'll do is we'll take a moment because I have the extra card that goes back into the deck. I'll go ahead and shuffle the cards really quickly to make sure that she's mixed in. Right, and so now, this reading consists of 5 cards. It's a Kipper Cross. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a moment to shuffle the cards, and we're going to need 4 additional cards because the main person male is going to be the 5th card. Or actually, it's the 1st card, and we're going to pick 4 more cards. So what I'm doing is, and when I use a Kipper Cross, this is a great spread to have if you want maybe a different angle or perspective on a particular situation. But the way I use it is that this is a great spread to use as a weekly spread. And you'll see why when I cover the position meanings. So because I use it as a weekly spread, so let's just say I'm going to be asking about the course of my week. How's my week going to go? And as I'm shuffling this, I want to give credit where credit is due. I did not come up with this spread. I discovered it through a group that I am a part of on Facebook. And it's part of the World Divination Association run by Tony Poole, who's known as the Card Geek. And so I got this from her, so I'm giving credit where credit is due. Okay, so again, I'm focusing on asking the cards, what do I need to know about the course of my week, my upcoming week? All right, so I've shuffled the cards. So now, because this is actually a reading for me, I'm going to cut the cards towards me. Now I'm going to spread the fan out, or fan the cards out. And what I'm doing is I'm looking for 4 cards. 1, 2, that are getting my attention. 3, and 4. So these are the 4 cards that are going to make up the reading. And now I'm counting back, just like I always do. 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so now we have the cards. So the first card, again, is the significator card. That goes into the middle of the layout. And this is card 1. So card 1 will always be you in the middle of the spread when you're using a significator card, right? So now the second card, it gets laid out where I put it above the significator card. And this is, I call it the position above, right? So because it's literally above the person. So this card can represent what's on the person's mind. You know, what is the person thinking about? Then the next card goes below. If this is above, this is below, right? So for those who may walk a pagan path, you'll know as above, so below, right? That just popped into my head. So here we have below. And below would represent the opposite. If this is the mind and what's on the person's mind in terms of thinking, this is what the person may be feeling or needing to process on an emotional level, right? Another thing that I use it for actually is that this is what the person is standing on, right? His feet are closest to this card, so he's standing on this. So this could represent something that I would have to get under control over the course of the week, right? So this is what's on my mind. This is what I'm either needing to get under control or I'm needing to develop some kind of understanding about, because feet symbolically represent what we understand, right? So there is that. Now the next 2 cards are very important based on the direction. So this is a nice follow-up to the line of sight because we're incorporating that element into this. So what I do is the next card is usually behind, right? Because the gentleman here is looking to the left side of the layout, right? So put the card to the right, and this would be behind because he's not facing it. So this could be, I read it a couple of ways. This could be something that I'm having some challenge with, right? Where this is something that may need to be overcome or develop some understanding around. This could be something that is going to be some sort of struggle because it's behind him, right? I mentioned Tony Poole, who's known as the card geek. She would language this as inauspicious placement, and so that's where that comes from. I tend to look at it too as maybe an element of the past if it's behind him. So this could be maybe a carryover from, if you do this from week to week, this could be a carryover from the previous week, right? As well, right? And another thing, if he's not facing this, since I talked about what the feet symbolically represent, the back can represent, issues around support. So this could be where, you might need some support this week, especially if it's an inauspicious placement and some kind of challenge. This could be where you might want to consider giving yourself some more support or getting some support to help with that, right? And then the last card would be, if this is behind, this is before, right? Or ahead. I like before. And before would represent what's coming up. And if it's a challenging card because the gentleman or the main person male is facing it, it could be something that you're able to deal with because you're taking it head on or you're dealing with it head on. You're willing to face it. Those kinds of things, right? So again, depending on the direction of the card, that's where we have the line of sight. Above will always be what's on the person's mind. Below will always be what the person has to overcome or get under control, right? Or what the person has some feelings about, right? And then depending on where this card is facing, then we have either behind and before or behind and before, depending on which way the card is, looking. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's now take a look at the card. So I start with above. So this is what's on my mind for the upcoming week. So the card is living room. So living room is a card that can represent, personal space and privacy. So for me, it could be what's on my mind is how can I create space for myself? I may be thinking about the ways in which I want to have my personal space. I want to have, privacy, right? And I'm also thinking in my head, what am I willing to make space for this week? What am I willing to create room for, playing on the idea of living room, right? What am I willing to make room for this week? Now, it could also be that there may be something having to do with my actual living room or a room in my home, right? Because living room doesn't just represent one's living room, it could represent any kind of room, right? So this could just represent, is there something about a particular room that I live in, I'm playing on the words living room, that is on my mind, right? But my first go-to with this is that it has to do with privacy and personal space. So that's how I would look at living room. So now below, this would be, again, what I have feelings about or what I'm working on getting under control. Taking a look at the card, okay. So here we have sad news. So this card is about receiving news or messages. That would be the news part of the card. But it carries the implication that the news being received is going to be either upsetting or disappointing or have some kind of sadness around it. And it's very interesting because I talked about emotions, right? Getting emotions under control, right? Or having feelings about something. So the feelings could be feelings of sadness, feelings of disappointment, feelings of being upset and needing to get those under control, right? But it could come through some kind of news or message that provokes those kinds of feelings, right? But it would be like getting some sort of upset or disappointment under control, right? And it could even be like the upset could be because there wasn't enough either privacy or personal space in the week for me, and that caused or that leads to some kind of upset or disappointment if I read the cards from top to bottom. Right, so there is that. So again, sad news would be about upset, disappointment, sadness, that maybe is being communicated through some kind of news that I need to kind of get under control, or feelings of sadness and disappointment or upset that I need to get under control, right? So those would be above and below. So now let's take a look at behind. And here we have high honors, or this, yes. So this card is high honors. I thought it was receiving high honors, but it's high honors. So high honors for me is a card that can represent recognition of some kind, right? So this could be in the past or behind me. It could be struggling with something having to do with my reputation, struggling with recognition or praise. And it could even be, if I go with the idea of like that's a struggle, then it could be like, receiving some kind of praise and I have difficulty with that, right? It reminds me of the instances where, you're given a compliment and you kind of want to, kind of dismiss or discount the compliment, so something along those lines. But it could also be, elevation in status, because this card can represent moving up, and so for me in that regard, this is a career card. So it could be saying too that there may be something having to do with my career, or maybe gaining some kind of recognition within my career that may be a bit of a challenge this week, right? Or in the upcoming week, right? And it could be the area where I need, some support. But again, high honors can represent, reputation, recognition, achieving something. So there may be a struggle with trying to achieve something that I would need support with. But I see my first go-to with this card is usually for me, it revolves around career, right? So that is high honors. And then, well, let's take a look at before. And here we have the mind card. So now, what I love about this deck is that some of the images are different. It kind of sets it apart from most Kipper decks. So the mind card is actually the traditional card, gloomy or murky thoughts, right? So here we have, I'm facing something having to do with my mind. So usually for me, this card is about confusion, uncertainty, doubt. It's about having maybe a negative mindset or pessimistic mindset, something of that nature. And needing to, so like I said, I talked about earlier, if we're having a challenge now, or a challenging card show up in this spot, it represents, even though it is a challenge, that I'm willing to face it, right? So here we have this idea about maybe there's some uncertainty. If I go with the cards going across, maybe there's some sort of uncertainty or doubt or confusion that I'm facing, main person male facing this card, about my career, right? So I'm seeing that. It could even be like, where do I go from here with my career, you know, kind of thing, right? So, but there may be something that provokes that. You know, with the undercurrent here, it could be some news or message that's upsetting, and it may revolve around my career or some sort of recognition or praise. Maybe it was negative praise, you know, some kind of negative recognition, right? And it leaves me, you know, uncertain going forward. But again, mind would represent taking a look at one's thinking, but it usually carries the implication that the thinking is negative in nature or pessimistic, or that there's an air of uncertainty or doubt or confusion. Right? And if there is, you know, some confusion, uncertainty, doubt, if there is some feelings of disappointment, being upset, is it any wonder why I might have on my mind about personal space and privacy, right? Keeping to myself. So what I would do at this point, if I was writing in my journal, I would write all that down, and then I would follow up, you know, a week later or the next week to revisit the cards and see what actually happened, right? But this is one example of the Kipper Cross using the significator card in the middle. So now we'll do another one, only we'll switch the man out and put the woman in its place. All right, and we're back. And while I was off camera, I took the liberty of taking the main person female card out of the deck because this will be the subject for this particular reading. And I put the main person male back in. And so now we're going to take a moment to shuffle the cards. So we're going to put this card aside. And let's just say we have a woman who's working on her study and practice of Kipper. Let's keep it relative to the video, right? So let's say we have a woman who's interested in Kipper. She's excited about picking the cards up, and she's asking herself through the cards, what does she need to know about her study and practice of Kipper? So I'm shuffling that into the cards. All right. And now that I've shuffled the cards, because this is a question that is not about me, I cut the cards away from me. Now we're going to fan them out. And we're going to pick 4 cards from the fan. This one got my attention first, so this is 1, 2, 3. I'll go with this card as card 4. Okay. So those are the 4 cards we need for the layout. I'm taking the remainder of the deck up. All right. So I'm going to count back. 4, 3, 2, 1. And now we're going to start by laying the woman card in the center. Right? Okay. So that's the center. And then we have above. Remember, above is what's on the person's mind. Right? Below. Below is what they have to overcome, or what they need to have an understanding in, or what their feelings about the situation is. So now remember, the context is about her picking up Kipper as a study and practice, right? She wants to know about learning to read Kipper, right? So this would be what is on her mind about it, what she thinks about it, what she feels about it, or what she may have to work on overcoming to develop an understanding of the cards, right? Okay. So now, because she's looking this way, line of sight, we have behind. This would be what particular area of challenge could be for her, or what she might need some support to help her with, right? And then we have before, which would be something that she's going to be facing going forward, right? So those are the 4 cards. So now let's start with the card that's above. So above. Okay, so here we have sad news again. So what's on her mind is possibility of being upset with the messages. Now remember, this is news or messages that provoke emotions of upset, disappointment, or sadness. So she could be upset or disappointed with the messages that come through the cards, because let's keep this real. This is a challenging card, right? And Kipper has a balance of wonderful cards and not so positive cards, right? So it's about learning to kind of work through the challenging messages or the disappointing messages or the upsetting messages that may come through the cards, right? But that's possibly on her mind. It's like, I'm seeing this like, how do I handle or how do I deal with the possibility of receiving upsetting messages, right? And here's the thing, this is known as a cause and effect card. So, you know, what would be the effects on her if she was to receive upsetting news or messages in the course of her readings, right? Now, this could also be, you know, being disappointed with herself, you know, and how could she work through thoughts? Now, this is in the position of thoughts. How could she work through thoughts of disappointment? You know, maybe if she doesn't pick up the cards right away, or, you know, she picks up the cards and she realizes that, you know, because of the messages that are upsetting, that, you know, she's disappointed with that. You know, is disappointed with the idea that she picked it up. You know, I'm going on and on here. But the idea is about, you know, working through news and messages that are upsetting or disappointing or create some kind of sadness, right, as a response, right? So that's what's on her mind above her. Then what's below her? What would she need to overcome or understand? Okay. So here we have a long way, and a long way is the patience card. It represents time and distance. So this could just represent going the distance. She's going to have to understand that, you know, for her, it may be a time period, a long time period for her where she feels like she's gotten to the place where she understands the cards. Remember, I said this was in the position of, you know, overcoming or understanding or getting something under control. So the first thing that has to happen is that she's going to need to be patient, right? This is a long time's patience. Usually this card represents a time period of 1 to 2 years. It's not saying that it's going to take her that long to overcome, overcome this or understand the cards, but it's going to take some time, right? And she has to be willing to give herself that time, right? To be patient with herself, right? This card is about a journey and it's going to take some time, right? Now, this is also a movement card, so this would imply that there's going to be some movement here, which is good, right? And if I go with the visual, you know, here we have a train track, you know, so it represents being on track, staying on track, you know, that kind of thing, right? But again, this card would just represent understanding that it's going to take time, right? This card can also represent, as I'm talking out loud, this is coming to me too. This card can also represent literal roads. So this could just represent the road she's on, the path that she's on, this kind of thing. But it's making me feel like understanding the cards won't happen overnight, won't happen right away, and she has to be patient. And that could be where the upset could come in, right? She may be upset or disappointed because of the time she feels it's going to take or it's going to require, right? So that is how I would look at a long way in this position. Then we have behind. What's behind her? And here we have, oh, this is great. Okay, so here we have success in love. So success in love usually represents a friendship or a relationship, some kind of partnership. But because that was not the context of the question, I would say that for her, this card can represent forming a relationship with the cards themselves, right? She needs to look at the cards as her friend, right? But the other aspect of this card for me, it represents faith and trust, right? So she needs to have faith and trust in herself as she's learning the cards. One of the meanings that I have for this card is about trusting her intuition, right? So this is about trusting your intuition. So she would have to trust her intuition, right? as she's reading the cards, right? And really, if we go with it, that if this is about areas of support, then her intuition is going to be her support as she's learning the cards, right? But the biggest thing is that she needs to have faith and trust in herself and probably in the system, right? If she's going to have patience, right? Going with this card, if she's going to have patience for the path that she's on, then she's going to need to have faith and trust in the process, right? And also, too, that's going to be the thing that's going to be helpful, too, when she receives those possible upsetting or disappointing news or messages through the cards, right? She's going to have faith and trust, right? But the biggest thing with this card is the success aspect of it. It's called success in love, and usually it talks about being successful. Now, that would be the possible areas of challenge, right? So success for her could be a challenge in part maybe because she doesn't have faith in herself. She doesn't trust her intuition, right? You know, if she's not going to be quote unquote successful, or she's going to struggle with that, it's because, in part, going back to what we talked about with the first two cards, they're telling a story here. So the success might be a challenge if she doesn't work through the possibility of how she's going to allow possible upsetting or disappointing news to affect her, right? And also, too, the patience thing, right? She would be successful if she gives it time, if she, employs patience. Right, so that's how I would look at the success in love card in the behind position. So now she's looking this way. So now what's before her? Okay, so here we have thoughts. And so thoughts is a card that can represent thinking and planning, right? So this would be about her thinking and planning for the future. What are her plans for the future regarding her study and practice? Now, the other thing here with this, we have the image of the thinker, right? And so this card for me can represent not just thinking and planning, but also meditation, contemplation. So she needs to be thinking about the cards, meditating on the cards. In addition to that, I would see this card as research and analysis besides meditation and contemplation. So this could just be about gathering information, and that could be informational sources, that would be helpful in her study and practice. Right, so again, the thoughts card is about thinking and planning. So this would be about thinking and planning for the future. What does she see? What does she envision for her future with the cards? What is the motivation for her picking up the cards and wanting to study them, right? Again, because this card is about planning, right? So what's the plan, right? And it could be what's the plan that she needs to employ or put to work in terms of helping her study the cards, helping her become successful, right? If we go with the idea that success in love is behind her, what would she need to plan on, or how could she plan her success, right? If I put the card down, then if we read it from left to right, if she wants to be successful, she has to have some kind of plan. What's the plan? She needs a plan for her success, right? But I would see this too, gathering information, analyzing her readings, maybe taking the emotions out of it. If she's feeling a certain way, we have feelings here, upset, disappointment, take her feelings out of it, and maybe how can she be more neutral? But it would make me feel like too, like maybe even revisiting her readings, analyzing her readings. So that is how I would look at this. Again, if we're talking about a woman who's asking about her study and practice of Kipper, she needs to work through upsetting or disappointing news or messages, right? Because that's on her mind. Well, how is she going to be affected by that, right? She needs to develop an understanding of that the process is going to take time. She's on a journey. She needs to be patient, right? But, but on a positive note, this is about, the path. So there's something about the path that she's on, right? Like this is part of her journey. This is part of the road that she's traveling, right? And if she wants to be successful, she needs to be willing to trust her intuition. and to see the cards as her quote-unquote friend. She's developing a relationship with the cards, right? So she needs to be able, on some level, to see the cards as her friend, right? And have faith in herself and faith in the cards, right? And then she needs to also be thinking about the cards, planning for the future with her cards, meditating on the cards, contemplating the readings, doing research, looking into maybe other informational sources, and analyzing her readings, because this card is about reflection, right? Coming back to them at a later time for reflection. So that is how I would look at this in this context. So now let's move on, and we'll do another one using the main person male card, and we'll form a question giving the reading some context. All right, and we're back. And so what I did was, off camera, I took the liberty of taking the main person male card out because this is going to be the subject of this particular reading, and I put the main person female back in. So since we're doing readings that focus on either a man in the middle or a woman in the middle of the situation or in the midst of the experience, I'm going to do a little bit of gender swapping in this regard. So let's say that we're doing a reading for a man, or he's reading the cards for himself. We could do it either way. And he is wanting to know about his relationship status, right? So let's just say that he is in the throes of a new relationship, like he just started seeing a woman, right? And he's really excited about the possibility of where the relationship might go. So let's just call her Leslie. That's the name that's in my head. So let's say he's seeing a woman named Leslie, and let's just give him a name too, since we did that for the person he's seeing. So let's call him Jake. Okay, so Jake here is seeing a woman named Leslie, and let's give him some further context. Let's add some more elements into the story. So let's just say he has come out of a divorce, and so he's been divorced for a minute, and he met Leslie, and Leslie has been the first woman, since he's been divorced, that he's been seeing, and he really likes Leslie, and he likes the direction of the relationship. So he's taking the time to ask the Kipper, what does he need to know about this relationship with Leslie, going forward? That's his question, right? So now we have context. So now this is Jake, so we're going to take Jake, and we're going to put Jake aside, and we're going to take the rest of the deck, and we're going to take a moment to shuffle the cards, focusing on the question. So again, the question is, Jake wants to know about his situation with Leslie and where that could be going. All right. So again, because this is not about me, I'm cutting the cards away from me. All right, so now I'm picking 4 cards that are getting my attention. These 2 are right off the bat, and I have card 3 over here. I love it when they do it really quickly, and this is card 4. I love when that happens. Okay, so taking the rest of the deck and putting it to one side. I'm counting back. 4, 3, 2, 1. And now I'm going to start with taking Jake. We're bringing Jake back into the picture, and Jake is going to go right in the center. Now the center card represents a focus, but in this case this is the midst of the experience for Jake, right? And the idea here is that Jake gets to look at this situation from all different possible angles, right? Because he has cards all around him, right? So now, first card is above, right? So we place that above him, right? Remember, this card represents what is on his mind. What is he thinking about the situation with Leslie? Below, what is his current level of understanding about it? What does he have to overcome? Or what is he feeling about it? This is his thoughts. This is his feels. How does he feel about it, right? Then we have, because he's looking this way, we put behind on this side. This represents the past. So this could be maybe something having to do with how the relationship with Leslie started, or something in the recent past, or maybe something in the further past that could be a challenge for him going forward with Leslie, right? And then before, what is ahead? This is actually the most important card because it frames his question. He wants to know, what does he need to know about his relationship with Leslie going forward, right? Okay, so now taking a look at above, we have, ooh, okay, so here we have expectations. I love this. Okay, so what's on his mind is his expectations. This card is about expectations, anticipation. It's also a card that represents patience, like in the last segment where we had a long way. This is another patience card because it represents waiting, right? But for me, this card can represent anticipation for the future, right? We have expectations for the future that's on his mind. This card could also be about his needs, his wants, his desires, all those kinds of things, right? But for me, the first thing that comes to my mind is about anticipation of the future. You know, this card would suggest like we're waiting for something to either arrive, we're waiting for something to unfold, we're waiting for something to happen, right? So this card is about anticipation and expectation for the future. Oh, I love it. Okay. All right, so that's above. Let's take a look at below. And here we have, okay, so here we have sorrow and tribulations, right? So this is known as grief and adversity, right? So now, this is great if we take into account that this card represents what he's overcome or what he has some feelings about. So he may be feeling stressed, right? This card for me can usually represent stress, right? So the first thing, he may be feeling stress as what's on his mind is about, you know, the expectations for the future, you know, that kind of thing. He could be putting a lot of stress on himself, an undue burden, because he's thinking about the future, you know, in terms of his expectations and anticipations, that kind of thing. He could also be thinking about, what does Leslie anticipate? You know, what is Leslie anticipating? What is she expecting from him, right? And that could be putting a lot of undue stress and burden on him, right? And check out the picture. You can clearly see that the figure in the card is stressed out, right? So this would be about like not giving himself a headache, because this is my headache card, right? So that could be headache in the literal sense or headache in the metaphorical sense, right? But not giving himself a headache about things, right? So it could just be a matter of, if we go back to expectation, could it just be that he might need to lower his expectations because it's creating a lot of stress on himself, right? Now, it could also be in the positive sense. If we talk about this card being in a position of overcoming, he may have overcome a lot of adversity to get to the space where he's actually, you know, enjoying a relationship, right? Now, remember, the context was he has been divorced for a minute. So it could just be a matter of maybe the divorce wasn't easy. That's adversity. You know, maybe his dating life up until Leslie hasn't been easy. That would be adversity, right? And so now he's in a space where he's actually looking forward to the future. If I go back to expectation, right? He's actually looking forward to the future, right? So in that regard, in the positive sense, this is great because it says that he's overcome a lot of grief, sorrow, and adversity, right? So this could be read two ways. Number one, in terms of the feels, in terms of the emotions, you know, how can he lower his stress? Because he may be stressing himself out, thinking about, you know, what the expectations are, what the anticipation is, you know, either for himself or that he thinks, what he thinks Leslie is needing, wanting, desiring in the relationship, and is putting stress on him, right? So that's how I would look at sorrow and tribulation. So now let's take a look at the card that is behind him. And here we have, oh my goodness. Yeah, so here we have Big Luck, the best card in the deck, right? So Big Luck is so wonderful. It outshines any challenging card. So this card nullifies sorrow and tribulation, right? But this card says like he's in a place where, you know, and maybe that's where the stress is, because maybe he's thinking, and this could be based on past experience, you know, maybe when he's been in a great spot or things were going well, you know, maybe the other shoe dropped, right? And so maybe he's thinking like, this could be too good to be true, you know, that I'm really, really happy. So he's maybe in a place where, you know, he's waiting for the other shoe to drop. And that could be, again, referring back to expectation and sorrow and tribulation together, right? But this card is fantastic. This card represents blessings, abundance, big luck, happiness, and not just happiness, like happiness for days, right? If we look at the image, we have Fortuna standing there, and she's surrounded by a cornucopia with fruit on each side of her, if I can get the word out, each side of her. And that represents something that's bearing fruit, something that is fruitful, you know, that kind of thing. So, this is a fantastic card. So this is what's behind it. And this is actually what's supporting him, right? If we go with the idea that this is about support, right? So it's about allowing him to realize how wonderful things are, to count his blessings, you know, for, you know, be able to maybe overcome, you know, the sorrows, the tribulations, the grief and adversity to get him to a place where he is now, you know? Oh, this is a great card. Okay. So now let's take a look at what's before him. And if there is a challenging card before him, remember, Big Luck is so positive, it outshines all the other cards, especially challenging cards. It weakens them or nullifies them. So this card here is, oh my gosh, this is even great. This is just as great. So here we have unexpected reward or unexpected money, right? So this card represents a bonus. We take a look at the image. Here we have, you know, a horseshoe, which is a sign of good luck, right? We also have dice on the table, so this could just represent, like, you know, being willing to take a chance, being willing to, you know, roll the dice, so to speak. You know, but this card usually represents some kind of surprise, some kind of bonus, some kind of improvement, that kind of thing. Oh my God, this is a wonderful card, right? So this just represents that he's got, and I love the fact that he's got, you know, big luck on one side of him and unexpected money on the other side. Right? Two great cards. So I love this, right? So it would say to me that he's got more good stuff to look forward to in his situation with Leslie, right? The biggest thing, I think, for him, that he needs to work on whatever his anticipations are, whatever his expectations are, or whatever he believes that Leslie might be anticipating or expecting, because he's got to work through not putting too much stress or pressure on himself or on the relationship, on the situation, right? So that would be my piece of advice for Jake. But I would say, Jake, you're in a good place. You know, appreciate the blessings and all the good times. But it looks like to me that with unexpected money, he's going to get more of it. And so now let's do one more to wrap this up. And again, we'll switch out the cards. We'll take out the main person male and we'll put the main person female in its place. And we'll do one final reading again with context. All right. And we are back for our final reading for this video. And I took the liberty off camera once again to switch out the cards. So again, we are now doing a reading with main person female as the central character, the central focus, you know. And this is the situation that came to me while I was off camera. So let's say we have a woman, and let's just give her a name. So let's call her Molly. So let's say Molly is wanting to explore her career path, right? So keeping it, you know, I'm keeping it with kind of traditional gender roles, right? Where most men are typically focused on their career. And I did that with Jake, switched it where he was asking about a relationship. And so Molly is now focused on her career because most of the women in my practice ask about relationships. But Molly's at a place where she's had this call, this kind of leading or prompting to want to become a minister. So she feels a calling for that. And not just any kind of minister, not necessarily, and when I say any kind, I mean not necessarily the more mainstream, traditional, conventional type minister. She wants to be more of a new thought, religious science, a unity, metaphysical minister. She feels called to walk that particular path. So Molly wants to ask the cards, what does she need to know about that path going forward, right? She's already, and let's give it further context. So let's just say whichever body or institution that she wants to get her ministerial education and license through, let's say she's already begun the process of looking into that because she feels so strongly about it, right? She feels like she's at a place in life and she feels like this is her call. She wants to move in this direction. So she's already taken steps by doing research and looking into it. So let's just add that. So now she's asking, what more does she need to know about that process right now? Okay, so that's the question. So we'll take the main person female card, put it aside, and we will go ahead and shuffle that question into the cards. So let's just say that Molly wants to know about her spiritual vocation, her spiritual calling to become a New Thought minister. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead once again, because the question is not about me, I'm going to go ahead and cut the deck. Fan the cards out. Okay, and now I'm picking 4 cards that are getting my attention. This one was immediate. That's 1. Over here is 2, 3. I love when they're that quick. And I'll take this one for 4. Okay, so those are the 4 cards. Take the remainder of the deck up. I'm going to count back. 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, and so now here we go. Here's our card that represents our querent, our seeker, Molly. So we'll put that in the middle. And now we're going to go above, below. And now she's looking this way, so we'll have behind and before. And so at this point, I didn't stress this before, but however you choose to lay out the cards will be fine for you. I'm just showing you how I do it, right? And my way is not the only way. I'm quick to say that when I do offer these readings, when I do them, and I offer these kind of instructional videos or these personal take or slant videos, this is just the way I do it in my personal practice. You know, you don't have to do it the exact same way, right? But what I will say this is that come up with your own way and then be consistent in that. So if you lay out the cards a similar way, be consistent in that, okay? That's all I will add as additional advice. Okay, so now remember, context is we have Molly here, and she's asking about going forward with this calling to become a New Thought minister, so above. Okay, so here we have thievery. So this is the theft card, right? So what's on her mind? So what's on her mind could be, what is she going to lose, right? Because the thief card represents loss. So it could just represent, like, what is she going to be missing out on? What is going to be taken away from her? What is she going to be losing moving forward in this direction? Because that is the chief meaning of thievery. And thievery doesn't necessarily have to be a material kind of loss, right? It doesn't have to be something tangible. It could be, you know, the time, right? You know, it reminds me of like when I went and pursued my master's in psychology, the biggest thing I had to give up, or the biggest thing I was losing out on, was time, right? So it could just be a matter of what are going to be the things that she might lose going forward with that. So that's what's on her mind, right? The other thing here, and this is a positive spin on thievery, and so for me, this card can represent what are the takeaways, right? The thief takes something and gives to something else, right? So what are the takeaways? You know, what is going to be the takeaway for her moving in this direction, right? But the biggest thing for me, I would say first, would be to think about what could she be potentially losing, or what does she think she's going to lose moving in this direction, right? It makes me think, because on the image there's a man who's holding a bag of money, you know, and, you know, this idea about giving up the riches of the world, you know, to pursue a spiritual path, right? So it could just be a matter of giving up. Maybe there's a belief around that. We talked about new thought, right? So maybe there's a belief or a thought around, you know, the idea about, you know, money and the pursuit of money in terms of a spiritual career and all that kind of stuff, you know. So there may be something of that. It could just be like she's going to have to lose some kind of idea or way of thinking, right? The idea of new thought represents taking a look at, you know, conditioning and programming, you know, of the past, and replacing that with a new thought, a new idea, right? But that's how I would look at thievery. Number one, what could she be losing out on that's on her mind? You know, what are going to be the takeaways? you know, and what kind of thoughts maybe about money and maybe, you know, the loss of it that she's thinking about, right? So now that's above, so let's below. So now below is, oh, interesting, look at this. We have the same card from our previous segment with Jake, right? Here we have sorrow and tribulations again. So the idea here is about the stress. So there's going to be maybe potentially having to overcome the stresses of the curriculum, right? That's the biggest thing, that's, you know, and maybe the pressure that she may be putting on herself. If I go with the same things that I said with this card when he showed up for Jake, say the same thing here for Molly. You know, but the first thing that usually this card can represent, dealing with a lot of stress, right? So it's going to be very stressful and having to overcome the stresses or the stressors about, you know, moving forward with the educational process, right? This card would make me feel like it's not going to be easy, right? And she has to kind of manage that, right? All right, and so now behind her, and here we have cards repeating again. So here we have unexpected money, right? So it could be that there's going to be some surprises, right? You know, it could be a challenge for her in terms of improvement, right? Now, I see this sometimes as, you know, the idea about tending to your house. This is one of my personal meanings for this card. So this could just be a matter of, one of the things could be the challenge and the stress could be about like managing her household. But now we have an implication here about money, right? So there could be unexpected money is still about money, right? And the thievery card, you know, with the man holding a bag of money. So there's something about money and how her money situation might shift or change as a result of pursuing this, right? So the cards are kind of giving her some thought, or maybe having a new thought about what she's going to do in terms of maybe the financial piece or component to the educational experience, right? So I'm seeing that. It could also be too, like if there's a way, I'm going to pick this card back up. If there's a way, because this card can be about bonuses, and unexpected money would imply like not necessarily money that you had to work for, right? It could be a bonus or a surprise. In that regard, it could be, if she's doing research and analysis, she could see if there's a way to kind of maybe gain like a bonus. And for me, the first thing that's coming to my mind is maybe some sort of scholarship. You know, do they award scholarships? Do they kind of help out? Because now remember, this is behind her, so this is in a position of support. You know, do they support their students maybe in a financial way? That kind of thing. So it would be maybe in her best interest to kind of look at the ways that they may offer financial support or some kind of bonuses with the program, something of that nature, right? I'm seeing that, right? Especially if the finance component is going to be stressful for her, like the loss of money, like maybe pursuing this, if she has to maybe, like maybe, I'm throwing a hypothetical out there, like maybe reduce her hours on the job, you know, if she has, or maybe even two jobs or whatever she's doing to make money, that may have to shift and change. She may be losing out on that. And so she may need to say, what can I do in terms of that? What would they be able to offer to me that might make up for that kind of loss, right? Okay. So now let's take a look at before her. Okay, and so here we have a long way. So it's very interesting to see that even in the course of doing different readings with different questions, how the same cards kind of show up. So here we have a long way. So the biggest thing here is that she's looking at a long road. She's looking at a long road to go, right? The path. It's going to take some time. So remember, this is, when it's a timing card, this can represent a situation that is like 1 to 2 years down the road. So this would just suggest like the educational process for her is going to be some time. She's going to have to put time into it, right? And she's going to have to be patient. So like she may feel the calling right now to do something regarding, you know, a ministry or, you know, New Thought ministry in particular. But these cards are saying like, okay, that's going to happen down the road. You're not going to become a minister overnight. It's going to be down the road, right? So this is just a long time off, you know, a long way to go, that kind of thing, right? And so what she could do is celebrate the progress that she's making along the way, right? And that would come back to unexpected money. Oops, I turned the card over, so let me do that. So that would come back to unexpected money, right? So it could just be a matter of like what would be the little wins that she makes along the way. And so I would say like that would be maybe like semesters. If the course load works by semesters like it was when I was in school, you know, then maybe celebrating each semester is one part and progress made along the entire way or in the entire road or the entire path, right? So that's how I would look at this. Summing up, I would say to her that the biggest thing going forward is to look at what would be the things that she might think she's going to lose out on going down this road, right? And it's making me feel like there may be financial stress attached to that. And the ways that she could do that would be to say, is there a way that they could maybe financially support her, you know, even in a small way, right? Because I'm looking at the money in the jar, right? In some small way going forward. Like what would the institution itself offer its students? So on that note, I will go ahead and end this reading and end this video. And as I said in the previous installment, I hope for those of you who have been asking me to kind of elaborate more on how I personally work with Kipper, I hope you found this helpful in your own personal study and practice, and I hope you found it informative. And so going forward, I have some more ideas about spreads that I want to present, and I'm keeping with the idea that we're talking about basic spreads, you know, because that was the initial request made for me, is like to show basic spreads. So I'm keeping it simple. But here's the thing I want to say as I'm wrapping up. Each one of these videos that I'm going to be presenting is going to help you with your journey, and when you get to the place where you're ready to do possibly a Kipper Grand tableau, right? Because all of these kinds of spreads will be helping you build up your confidence so that you can tackle that when you feel like you're ready, because you will be incorporating elements of these spreads into a Kipper Grand tableau. So there's a method to my madness, so that is what I'm kind of leading towards. But I wanted to stick with the context of keeping things basic and simple because that's what I was asked to do. But going forward, just keep in mind that everything that you are kind of learning through your study and practice is actually building up to eventually working with a grand tableau. Okay, so on that note, I will go ahead and close. I'm James Himm Mitchell. Thank you so much for sharing this space here with me, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you in a future video. And until then, I hope you have a wonderful day, and take care.